What if the pyramids had never been made to hold bodies but consciousnesses? And if those perfect forms, silent in the desert, were not tombs of the past, but messages left for the future? When you look at the pyramids in Egypt, something inside you is restless, as if the soul recognized a symbol that the mind still can't translate. There are questions that span millennia without losing strength. Who actually built these structures? For what true purpose? And why, even after thousands of years, they continue to arouse fascination, discomfort, and a strange sense of familiarity? It's not just historical curiosity, it's something deeper, something that touches the invisible. The desert keeps silence, but it does not keep forgetfulness. Under the relentless sun, those stones appear immobile, but they carry a living presence. Like sentinels of time, they watch civilizations rise and fall, religions arise and disappear. Certainties are written and then erased. Still, they remain, intact. You need it. Challenging. From an early age, we were taught a simple story. Powerful pharaohs, tombs monumental, death, glory, symbolic eternity. A comfortable narrative repeated in books, museums, and classrooms. But there is something strange about this explanation. Something that doesn't fit. A feeling that the answer is too small for the magnitude of the question. If you feel like certain things are no coincidence, maybe this video is just the thing that you needed to hear right now. Because some truths are not revealed by force, they approach in silence when we are ready to listen. The pyramids are not just impressive because of their size, they disturb because of their precision, by choice of place, for the almost perfect guidance, by the mathematics hidden in proportions, for the feeling that nothing there was improvised, as if every stone had placed following a logic that goes beyond the functional. Ancient civilizations spoke of doors between worlds, of paths between heaven and earth, of points where the human and the divine touched. Egypt did not see death as an end, but as a transition, a return, an awakening. So why imagine that your greatest constructions, could they just be bone deposits? There are symbols that cross cultures. The sacred mountain, the celestial ladder, the axis of world. The pyramid brings them all together. It points upwards, but also dives downwards. Inside, its form and function. It is matter and idea. Its weight and lightness at the same time. Perhaps the biggest mistake is looking at the past through the eyes of the present. Measure the old only with modern tools, forgetting that there were times when science, spirituality, and consciousness were not separate. They were one thing, one same search. In this video, we will not deny the story but listen to it more carefully. We won't destroy certainties but expand them. Because between a tomb and a portal there is an abyss of meaning. And crossing this abyss requires courage to question. Stay with me. If something inside you has started to awaken now, trust that feeling. Sometimes the pyramids are not calling us to look out, but to remember something that has always been inside us. For centuries, official history repeated the same explanation with almost complete certainty. Absolute. The pyramids of Egypt, it is said, were built as monumental tombs for powerful pharaohs. Grandiose works erected to glorify deified kings and guarantee their safe passage to the afterlife. This version is taught as a fait accompli, rarely questioned, almost never revisited in depth. According to this narrative, everything begins around 2,500 years before Christ. During the 4th dynasty, Pharaoh Cheops would have ordered the construction of the Great Pyramid as your eternal home. Thousands of workers equipped with simple tools would have extracted, transported, and fitted millions of stone blocks over some decades. An impressive feat, without a doubt, but presented as an exclusive result of human strength, social organization, and religious devotion. In textbooks, we see illustrations of gigantic ramps, wooden sleds, ropes of vegetable fiber, and men pulling stones under the scorching sun. The engineering is described as ingenious yet primitive. Egyptian spirituality appears as a system symbolic, almost naive, centered on the obsession with death and the afterlife. The pyramids, in this context, they would only be the architectural culmination of this obsession. This explanation is reassuring. She keeps everything within understandable limits, does not require that we rethink human history, does not threaten scientific paradigms or structures academics. The pyramids remain admirable, but domesticated. A miracle ancient, yes, but completely locked in the past. Museums reinforce this vision. Tour guides repeat the itinerary. Documentaries follow the same narrative thread. Everything seems organized, so there is no room for doubt, as uncomfortable. After all, if we accept that they were just tombs, then we don't need to make more questions. The case is closed. But even within this official narrative, small cracks appear. Contradictions discreet, often ignored. Details treated as curiosities, not as problems. Still, they are there, waiting for someone willing to look closer. Attention. For example, other Egyptian royal tombs, arguably funerary, are filled with inscriptions, symbols, sacred texts, names, images of the pharaoh and protective gods, are true books of stone. The Great Pyramids remain silent. This silence is often explained as an aesthetic choice or a loss caused by time. Nothing more than that, they say. The official narrative also states that the knowledge necessary to build pyramids emerged gradually, almost inevitably, as if humanity were destined, step by step, to get exactly there. There is no mystery, there is no jump, just linear evolution. This way of telling the story creates a feeling of completeness, as if everything was resolved, as if there was nothing left to discover, just details to polish. Questioning this version is often treated as ignorance or fantasy, but there is an important detail. Science does not advance by protecting comfortable stories. She advances when someone dares to ask if what seems obvious really is. And maybe the biggest problem with the official narrative of the pyramids is not what it says, but what it says. Stop asking. If we accept without question that those colossal structures were just tombs, we fail to investigate deeper possibilities. And perhaps in doing so, we are closing a door that should never have been locked. Because when an explanation needs to be repeated many times to sustain itself, perhaps she is hiding something that we are not yet ready to face. The more one observes the interior of the Great Pyramids, the more evident a disturbing paradox. What should be there simply isn't. In monuments supposedly built for death, death seems absent. No mummy, no sarcophagus with an intact lid, no funerary text describing the journey of the pharaoh beyond, just empty corridors, bare chambers, and an echoing silence, uncomfortable questions. In ancient Egypt, death was recorded with obsessive precision. Royal tombs in the Valley of Kings are true spiritual maps, covered in hieroglyphs, spells, prayers, and detailed instructions for the soul to cross the duat. Every wall spoke. Each symbol had a function. Nothing was left to chance. The absence of all this in the Great Pyramids, it's not just curious, it's anomalous. The most common explanation states that the tombs were looted in antiquity. What thieves removed bodies, objects, and inscriptions. But this justification does not hold completely. Thieves steal gold, they don't erase entire walls. Do not remove symbols carved in stone. They do not leave chambers completely smooth, as if never had been prepared for a funeral ritual. Furthermore, there is no clear evidence that the Great Pyramid was violated in the manner expected. There are no reports of makeshift tunnels, broken walls, or chaos internal, compatible with an aggressive serve. What you see is a space deliberately austere, functional, almost clinical. Another disconcerting point is the absence of the pharaoh's name. Pharaohs signed everything: statues, temples, obelisks, smaller tombs. The name was power. It was eternity, was identity. Still, in the largest monument attributed to Cheops, his name does not appear clearly and indisputably. This defies Egyptian cultural logic. There are only controversial marks found in upper chambers, discovered very time later, and which to this day generate heated debates about authenticity. Even if were legitimate, they would be timid exceptions in a building where the king's name should dominate each space. The absence also extends to objects. No treasure, no ritual furniture, no amulet, no offerings. Nothing that confirms the classic funerary function. An empire that believed the afterlife depended on these items, this lack is almost a spiritual nonsense. It's as if the pyramid had never been designed to contain a body. As if the center were not decomposition, but something else. Something more abstract, maybe more subtle. Something that leaves no obvious physical traces. When faced with these absences, many prefer to ignore them. It's more comfortable fill the void with generic explanations than admit that perhaps we are interpreting everything wrong. The unknown scares more than an incomplete story. But in science, as in spirituality, emptiness also communicates. The silence also teaches. Sometimes what wasn't left is more revealing than what was preserved. The pyramids seem to speak precisely for that what they don't show. If they were just tombs, we would expect unmistakable signs of this. However, how much? The more you look for, the less you find. And the less you find, the more the sensation grows that we are facing something that does not fit into the traditional narrative. Perhaps the pyramids were not emptied over time. Maybe they always have been like that, intentionally, prepared not to contain something physical, but to provoke something internal, one state, an experience, a threshold. And when we realize this, the question changes. It's no longer, where are the bodies, and becomes, what should happen here? This question, once asked, can no longer be ignored. The engineering of the pyramids begins to defy logic the moment we observe it without assumptions. It's not just about stacking giant rocks. It's about achieving a precision that still requires advanced instruments today. The Great Pyramid is aligned with true north, with an error of less than a few arc minutes, something extremely difficult even for modern engineers. It's not an approximation course. It's deliberate accuracy. Each side of the pyramid has practically the same measurement. The base forms a square almost perfect, level with minimal difference between the corners. In an era without lasers, without satellites, without reliable magnetic compasses, this should not be simple. Still, was done. And it was done once, without visible corrections, as if the project had already been completed, completely resolved before the first stone was laid. The blocks used impress not only for their size, but for their fit. In many points, it is not possible to insert even a blade between the stones. Some weigh dozens tons and were transported for kilometers. The traditional explanation speaks of ramps, human strength, and patience. But the more one studies the actual logistics involved, but this explanation seems insufficient. The granite used in the inner chambers comes from Aswan, hundreds of kilometers away. Distance. It is an extremely hard rock, difficult to cut even with modern tools. However, it features straight cuts, precise angles, and flat surfaces. There are perforations, cylindrical shapes that suggest advanced drilling techniques. This doesn't go with wood chisels, copper, and abrasive sand, at least not at the observed level. Contemporary engineers who have analyzed these structures admit discomfort. It doesn't fit into known models, does not necessarily mean technology futuristic or external intervention, but points to sophisticated knowledge that does not, is well documented. A lost knowledge, perhaps, that did not reach us in texts, only in stone. Another intriguing detail is the mathematical proportion. The relationship between the height of the pyramid and the perimeter of the base approaches the number pi. The ratio between different measurements reflects complex geometric patterns. Some call this a coincidence. Others see intention. The fact is that the repetition of these relationships suggests refined mathematical awareness. Furthermore, the pyramid appears to function as an integrated system. Passages, chambers, and angles are not there by chance. Each element appears to obey a structural logic and symbolic at the same time. It's not just a building, it's a coherent arrangement, almost like a tuned instrument. When you look at all of this together, the idea of improvisation disappears. There are no signs of trial and error. We don't see failed versions. We found no pyramids collapsed serving as learning. The leap in complexity appears abruptly, as if the knowledge was already mature. This raises a fundamental question. If the Egyptians learned to build like this, where are the stages intermediate? Where are the records of this learning? In a civilization that recorded almost everything, this technical silence is strange. Maybe we are underestimating the past. Or maybe we're stuck in a narrative that limits what is possible to imagine. The accuracy of the pyramids is not just a feat architectural, it is an invitation to question, a reminder that human history can be deeper, more complex, and more surprising than we have been taught to understand, believe. This discomfort does not diminish Egyptian genius, on the contrary, it expands it. He suggests a culture capable of integrating observation of nature, applied mathematics and symbolism spiritual in a single project. Perhaps the knowledge was not written because it was transmitted otherwise by initiation, practice, and direct experience. Stones, in this sense, they became permanent archives. What could not be lost was recorded in the structure itself. So the pyramid doesn't just house a space, it teaches a principle. And while we try to explain it simply as a physical work, we ignore the possibility that it is also a language, a silent, precise, and intentional language, waiting for readers capable of going beyond the surface. When the technique reaches this level, it stops being just utilitarian. It becomes expression of worldview. Maybe that's why, millennia later, we still feel small in front of these forms. They don't just display material power, they display coherence. And coherence spans time. If we accept this possibility, the question ceases to be how they built it and becomes why they built it that way. The answer, whatever it may be, it requires humility. It requires admitting that not all ancient knowledge is primitive. Some knowledge may have simply been forgotten, and forgetfulness sometimes weighs more than ignorance. Perhaps in the end, impossible precision is not a problem to solve, but a mirror, an invitation to recognize that history is not linear, and that certain times in the past still cast long shadows over the present. And these shadows remind us that old questions are still alive, waiting for courage, listening, and awakened conscience collective. Now, when the gaze moves away from the stone and begins to listen to space, the pyramids reveal another layer of mystery. Not just what you see, but what you feel. Who has been inside the Great Pyramid describes something difficult to explain. A dense silence, one subtle pressure, a feeling that the air is not ordinary, as if space reacted to human presence. Modern researchers have begun to notice that certain chambers have unusual acoustic properties. Sounds echo in a prolonged, specific, almost selective. Certain frequencies are amplified, while others disappear. This is not random. It's resonance behavior. And resonance requires intention or knowledge, does not happen by chance in such precise structures. The granite used in the king's chamber adds another, intriguing layer. Granite contains quartz, a mineral known for its piezoelectric properties. When subjected to pressure or vibration, it generates small electrical charges. In other words, the very material reacts to mechanical energy. On a modern scale, this is used in watches, delicate sensors, and technologies. On a monumental scale, the effect is still little understood. Imagine millions of tons exerting constant pressure on quartz-rich blocks, organized in a geometrically perfect structure. Imagine sounds, chants, beats, rituals, collective breathing reverberating in this closed space. Not as noise, but as frequency. What happens when matter, sound, and form cohere? Ancient cultures knew that sound is not just heard, it is felt. Mantras, drums, harmonic chants have always been used to alter states of consciousness. Egypt does not was an exception. Priests understood vibration as a creative principle. The very idea of sacred word that generates reality appears in ancient myths. Sound shapes. The sound opens. Some researchers suggest that the pyramids functioned as chambers of energetic amplification, not in the modern sense of electricity, but of consciousness. One place where vibration, geometry, and intention aligned to produce altered states. No for everyone, only for those who knew how to enter. The grand gallery, with its sloping shape and stepped walls, seems designed for conduct sound waves. It's not a simple corridor. It's almost a channel, a space where the sound moves, rises, returns, like a silent instrument waiting to be played. Recent experiments with digital simulations have shown that certain frequencies focus on specific points of the pyramid. This suggests that the structure may have designed to interact with waves, including electromagnetic ones. Even though although the studies are initial, they open up a disturbing possibility. The pyramid would not be passive. She would respond. What if the goal wasn't to store something, but to activate something? Not to keep a body, but provoke an experience? In many traditions, initiation involved symbolic death and inner rebirth, a deep, silent, solitary process. The internal chambers of the pyramids are not spaces for public celebration. They are intimate, contained, restricted. The shape of the pyramid itself is energetically stable. It distributes weight, channels forces, creates balance. In many cultures, specific geometric shapes are seen as natural concentrators. The pyramid appears repeatedly as a symbol of ascension and focus. Maybe it's not just a symbol. Maybe it's a tool. This does not mean that the Egyptians had electricity as we know it. It means something more subtle, a science of experience, a deep understanding of how the body human reacts to the environment, to sound, to space, something that cannot be measured only with instruments, but with perception. If something inside you begins to vibrate when you hear this, stay with it until the end, because this part of the story is not just about ancient stones. She talks about us, about how much we forget that we are frequency sensitive, that consciousness also responds to form and sound. Perhaps the pyramids were places where humans were affected, innated, where the noise of the world was outside, where the silence was not empty but charged, a silence capable of reveal deep layers of mind and spirit. When we begin to consider this possibility, the pyramids are no longer mysteries, dead. They become living questions. And perhaps the biggest one is this: what happens when do we resonate with something bigger than ourselves? When the gaze leaves the interior of the pyramids and rises to the sky, another pattern begins to emerge. Reveal. Not an isolated detail, but a broad, precise, and disturbing correspondence. The pyramids don't just appear to be erected on the earth. They seem to dialogue with the stars, as if they were mirrors of something bigger, projected not on the ground, but in the cosmos. Ancient Egyptians believed that the origin of the soul was in heaven. For them, Pharaoh did not die. He returned to the stars. The texts speak of a celestial journey, of the ascension towards a specific region of the firmament, not just any place, but an eternal home associated with the constellation Orion, linked to the god Osiris, symbol of death, rebirth, and cosmic order. When researchers began to compare the positioning of the three main pyramids of Giza with the stars of Orion's belt, something unexpected emerged. The arrangement on the ground reflects the arrangement in the sky with surprising similarity. It is not a perfect copy, but a symbolic and geometric correspondence, a scale relationship, inclination, and displacement that goes beyond simple coincidence. This raises a delicate question. Why would an ancient civilization care so much about reproduce heaven on earth? The answer may lie in the Egyptian worldview. For them, the universe was an ordered system, governed by principles that were to be reflected in everything. Heaven and earth were not separate. They were parts of the same balance. The pyramids, in this context, would function as connection points, axes, places where what is above meets what is below, a translation in stone of the heavenly order. Not just physical monuments, but symbolic maps of the universe. There is also the time factor. Studies suggest that the configuration of Orion that best corresponds to the pyramids is not that of the classical period of Egypt, but of thousands of years before. A remote time, associated with the precession of the equinoxes, a slow movement of the Earth's axis that changes the apparent position of stars over millennia. If this is considered, an unsettling possibility emerges. The pyramids would not be aligned only with space, but with time. They would mark a moment specific to the past, a distant era, perhaps seen as origin, fall, or restart. One cosmic memory etched into the landscape. Egypt spoke of a golden age, a time of the gods when knowledge was full and harmony reigned. Perhaps the pyramids are an echo of this memory, not one common historical record, but a symbolic marker, a silent reminder of something that was and still influences. In addition to Orion, other alignments reinforce this idea. The pyramids are oriented accurately to the cardinal points. Its internal corridors point to regions specific to heaven, not to chance, but to stars that had spiritual significance. Deep. Everything suggests intention. This relationship between architecture and astronomy was not exclusive to Egypt, but there it reached an extraordinary degree. The sky was read like a text. The stars told stories, cycles, invisible laws. Building in alignment with them was a way of participating in this order, to anchor it in matter. If we look at it like this, the pyramid is no longer just an earthly construction. She becomes a statement, a gesture of alignment with the cosmos, an attempt to eternalize the relationship between human and universe. This changes the fundamental question. It is no longer a question of who built it, but of who was built. Maybe it wasn't just for the living, not just for the dead. Maybe it was for time itself. A sign left for anyone who in the future looked at up and down at the same time. When we realize that heaven was encoded in stone, we understand that the pyramids were not they only talk about power or vanity. They talk about cosmic belonging. From a civilization that saw itself as part of something vast, ordered, and conscious. And if we accept this, we must admit that the tomb or portal question begins to ask. Lose simplicity. Because a portal doesn't have to be physical. It can be symbolic, temporal, conscientious. A point where the human gaze is forced to cross limits. Maybe the pyramids weren't made to take someone to heaven. Maybe they were made to bring heaven to human consciousness. And if so, do they still fulfill their function? Whenever someone allows themselves to look beyond the stone and ask where they belong in the universe, when the idea of a portal arises, many imagine something physical, a literal opening between worlds. But for ancient cultures, portals rarely, they were material doors for you, were states, transitions, internal thresholds where common perception dissolved and something more broad was revealed. In Egypt, initiation was not information, it was transformation. And transformation required crossing an invisible boundary. Egyptian priests did not just seek intellectual knowledge, they were looking for alignment. The mind needed to silence. The body needed to be prepared. The spirit needed to be available. Initiation was a symbolic death followed by rebirth conscious. Not something public, but deeply individual. The pyramids, with their narrow corridors and isolated chambers, seemed to reflect exactly this process. Entering the pyramid was not entering a building. It was about entering a route. Each reduced passage, each change of inclination, each confined space broke the external reference. The outside world disappeared. All that was left was the body, the breath, and the silence. This kind of environment alters the mind. It induces deep introspection. In many spiritual traditions, physical space is used to guide internal states. Caves, underground temples, isolated mountains. The pyramid brings all this together in one only way. It isolates you from the noise of the world and directs your attention inward. There are no windows. There are no distractions. Just presence. Some scholars suggest that the king's chamber was not a place of rest, but of culmination. A point where the initiate, after crossing the route, remained silent absolute. There, deprived of external stimuli, the brain enters altered states naturally. Brainwaves change. The perception of time dissolves. The border between observer and observed weakens. Today, neuroscience recognizes that sensory deprivation environments can induce deep experiences, feelings of expansion, unity, dissolution of the ego. What before was called a mystical experience, today it begins to be understood as a potential latent human. This does not invalidate the sacred. It just brings it closer to the body. If the Egyptians understood this empirically, the pyramid could have been a consciousness technology, not in a mechanical sense but an experiential one, a device architectural design designed to facilitate specific states of perception. A portal doesn't stop another place but to another level of consciousness. This would explain why we found no signs of everyday use. The pyramid was not frequented. She was reserved, maybe only used a few times, maybe just for a few. 1. So precise space doesn't wear out with crowds. It preserves its function. In this context, the pharaoh is no longer just a ruler. He becomes an initiate maximum, someone prepared to cross that threshold and return transformed. Don't stop die, but to govern in line with the cosmic order. True power for the Egypt did not come from force, but from harmony with the invisible. This would also explain the absence of inscriptions. Initiations were not described, were lived. Knowledge was not exposed. It was protected by silence. The experience could be reduced to symbols on the walls. It needed to happen inside the individual. When we look at it like this, the pyramid is closer to a temple of consciousness than of a mausoleum, a space where humans were reminded of their greater dimension, where the common identity was falling apart, even if temporarily, to make way for something more broad. Perhaps the biggest modern mistake is to look for external answers to something that was designed to activate internal responses. The pyramid does not deliver ready-made meaning. She provokes. She confronts. It demands presence. If this is true, then the portal was never closed. It just doesn't work for who enters. Expecting to find objects, not states. For those looking for remains, don't revelation. The portal demands delivery, not curiosity. And that brings us to an uncomfortable question. Have we lost the ability to use certain structures because we forgot how to approach them internally? Maybe the knowledge has not been destroyed. Maybe it was abandoned. The pyramids remain there silent, not because they hold forbidden secrets, but because they are waiting for a specific type of look, a look that does not seek to dominate but understand, a look willing to cross internal limits. Maybe, in the end, the portal was always you. When alternative theories emerge, the reaction is often immediate and defensive. Don't debate. Discarded. It is not investigated. It is ridiculed. This is how the mechanism works, silencing. In the field of Egyptology, this phenomenon became visible throughout the recent decades. Independent researchers, engineers, and scientists who dared questioning the official narrative have faced closed doors, denied licenses, and attacked. The debate stopped being scientific and became political. Who controls the excavations controls the questions, and whoever controls the questions shapes the story. It's not. Explicit censorship is management of what is acceptable, an subtle filter that defines invisible limits to the human curiosity and preserves old, comfortable consensuses. There are understandable reasons for this institutional resistance. Changing paradigms threatens careers, financing, and professional identities. Universities, museums, and bodies. Governments depend on narrative stability. Admitting large gaps would imply review books, exhibitions, and curricula. It is safer to protect what has already been approved. However, security does not equal truth. Science thrives when it allows hypotheses, tests, and refutations. When this cycle is interrupted, knowledge stagnates. The silence becomes method, and silent methods rarely reveal the unexpected. In the pyramids, this lockdown delayed fundamental questions for entire generations, curious and impoverished dialogues between science, spirituality, and collective human experience in a continuous. Specific cases illustrate this pattern of containment. Projects interrupted at the height of discoveries. Doors sealed for decades. Exploration requests postponed indefinitely. The public justification usually invokes preservation and security, legitimate values without doubt, but preservation can also coexist with responsible research. The problem arises when caution becomes a permanent veto. At this point, protection turns into obstruction, and curiosity pays the price. Without broad access, hypotheses remain incomplete, debates are impoverished, and the public is suspicious. The trust science depends on openness, method, and shared intellectual courage when evidence challenges established and comfortable narratives for everyone involved directly. There is also the cultural factor of selective skepticism. Bold theories are rejected before they are tested, while fragile but traditional explanations receive tolerance. This creates asymmetry in the debate. History becomes defended, not examined. Questioning becomes threat, but perceived threats do not invalidate legitimate questions. On the contrary, they signal blind spots. The pyramids concentrate many of these points, and maybe that's why provoke intense reactions. When symbols defy chronologies, functions, and certainties, power structures close, not out of malice but out of accumulated institutional inertia. Breaking this inertia requires transparency, interdisciplinary collaboration, and collective humility to reevaluate old central hypotheses. The imposed silence does not erase the questions, just postpone them, and postponed questions tend to return stronger. The pyramids are still there, defying reduced explanations. They do not require belief. They require openness. When the investigation is free, the mystery matures. When it is controlled, the mystery becomes politicized. Maybe it's time to unlock doors. Don't stop to impose answers, but to allow for better questions. Because historical truth does not fears light, and enough light reveals complexity, not convenient and final simplifications. See, if we accept this, the past breathes again before us, and breathing changes everything we thought we knew about the pyramids. We have reached the threshold where questions stop asking for answers and start asking for silence. After crossing stone, number, sound, and star, something simple and profound remains. The awareness that the pyramids continue to work on us, not because they hide secret mechanisms, but because they raise the right questions, questions that are not they resolve with maps, dates, or names, but with presence. Maybe they were never just tombs. Perhaps they were never portals in the literal sense. Maybe it was mirrors, gigantic mirrors erected so that the human being could see himself in front of time, the cosmos and the mystery of his own mind. Therefore, it is not important to choose a definitive label. It is important to understand the effect. When a civilization builds something capable of surviving millennia intact, it does not speak only with his contemporaries. She talks to us, and the message seems clear. There is a greater order, and participating in it requires listening, not domination. Listening. The pyramids remind us that knowledge without consciousness is noise, what technique without purpose is weight, and that spirituality without experience is just talk. They remain because they balance these forces: stone and idea, form and silence. If this reflection touched something in you, allow yourself to continue, not running after answers ready, but cultivating more honest questions. The world needs less certainty, rigid, and more awakened consciences. If this message resonated on any level, subscribe and follow, along with us. Not how followers of a theory, but as attentive travelers. The journey is not outward, it's for inside. What if what we call the past was never past? Just a reminder waiting be heard at the right time. Perhaps the real secret is to remember now that each sincere question opens an internal space where silence teaches, doubt matures, and consciousness learns to walk fearlessly with lucid presence.